The crew had been working for weeks on the barren planet, a seemingly lifeless stretch of rocky terrain. It was a mission unlike any other, humanity's first contact with an alien species. Everyone had high hopes, but there was an unspoken tension in the air, a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and fear. They were all aware that the universe was vast, but what lay beyond the stars had always been a mystery. The planet they had landed on was nothing special in appearance. The sky was a dull gray with clouds that hung low and heavy. The ground was cracked, the soil dry, and the wind carried a constant chill. The crew's base camp had been established with efficiency, a place where they could work and study, and perhaps, for the first time in history, make contact with intelligent life. Among the crew was you, the lead engineer, responsible for maintaining the base's power systems and communication devices. You had always been fascinated by space and technology, but nothing in your life had prepared you for this moment. Nothing could have. On the third day, everything changed. You were at the control station, adjusting the parameters on one of the communication devices when you heard it, the sound of someone approaching. You turned, expecting it to be one of the other crew members, but instead, you were faced with a figure unlike any human you had ever seen. She stood at the entrance of the room, her tall form bathed in a faint glow from the outside lights. Her skin was smooth and dark, with an almost ethereal sheen to it. She wore a flowing garment that seemed to shimmer as though woven from threads of light, and her violet eyes locked onto yours with a quiet intensity. You couldn't help but stare, mesmerized by her presence. Her gaze was unnerving, and yet there was something comforting about it. She didn't speak at first. She simply stood there, observing you with a look of quiet curiosity, as if waiting for you to speak first. The silence stretched between you, and you felt a strange mix of awe and apprehension rise in your chest. For a moment, you wondered if this was some kind of dream. Perhaps the isolation of the planet had caused your mind to wander. But no, this was real. The woman in front of you was no figment of your imagination. Finally, she spoke. "You are the engineer," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying an otherworldly quality that made the air feel thicker. You nodded, still trying to comprehend the situation. "Yes, I am," you replied, your voice sounding strangely small compared to hers. She stepped into the room, her movements fluid and graceful. You couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she glided, as though her feet barely touched the ground. You felt a shiver run down your spine. This wasn't just a chance encounter, it was something much more profound, something that would change the course of history. "Your people are curious," she continued, her eyes never leaving yours. "Curiosity is a powerful force, one that drives you to explore the unknown, but it also makes you vulnerable." You swallowed, unsure of how to respond. Her words seemed to echo in your mind, but you had no frame of reference for what she was talking about. "We're explorers," you finally managed to say. "We're here to learn." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture that somehow felt intimate, as though she were studying you. "And what is it that you hope to learn?" "The answer is always out there in the vastness of space, but do you understand the cost of seeking it?" The question left you speechless. You had never considered the idea of cost in the pursuit of knowledge. In all the training, in all the briefings, no one had ever mentioned the potential consequences of making contact with an alien race. You opened your mouth to speak, but found that no words came. Instead, the woman stepped closer to you. You could feel the air grow warmer, the silence thickening between you. She raised one hand, her fingers delicate and long, and with a soft motion, she brushed a strand of hair from your face. The touch was unexpected, and it sent a ripple of energy through your body. It was then that you noticed the difference between her and any human you had ever met. It wasn't just her appearance. Her features were more defined, sharper, almost unnatural in their perfection. It was her presence, something that seemed to stretch beyond her physical form. The way she looked at you made you feel as though she were seeing right through you, past the surface, to some hidden truth that you didn't even understand. Her gaze deepened, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Why are your eyes always on me, human?" The question was simple, yet it felt like a challenge. It wasn't an accusation, but there was a weight to it, something that made your heart skip a beat. You stood frozen, unable to speak. Your eyes had been on her without even realizing it, captivated by something you couldn't explain. But how could you answer her? What could you say? You had never been in a situation like this before, and you had no idea how to handle the profound emotions that stirred within you. Juno, the alien woman, as you later learned, didn't wait for you to respond. Instead, she took a step back, her eyes still locked on yours. She seemed to smile, though it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was as if she knew something you didn't, something that would soon become clear. "You are confused," she said softly, her tone almost amused. "You're not the first. In fact, you are just like the others before you." You felt a strange sense of unease settle in your stomach. Others before you. Who had she encountered? Were there more humans who had come to this planet and failed? Or had she met others from different worlds? There were too many questions, and you were growing overwhelmed. Before you could gather your thoughts, Juno turned and walked toward the door. Her movements were fluid, graceful, and almost hypnotic. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet room, but it was drowned out by the pounding of your heart. "Rest," she said over her shoulder. "We will speak again." And with that, she was gone, leaving you standing there, alone and uncertain. The room felt emptier now, quieter, as if her presence had filled the space in ways you couldn't explain. You stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of the encounter. Your mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what had just happened. The feeling of her eyes on you, the weight of her words, the way she seemed to see through you, it all felt like something out of a dream. But you knew it was. This was real. She was real. You didn't know it yet, but that was only the beginning. Juno's question would linger in your mind, echoing long after she had left. It would haunt you, pulling at your thoughts, pushing you into a direction you couldn't predict. The encounter had only just begun, and already you were changing. You just didn't know how far it would take you, or what it would cost. The days after the first encounter with Juno were unsettling. Every time you closed your eyes, her violet gaze filled your vision. When you opened them, you couldn't shake the feeling that she was somewhere nearby, watching. Her question, "Why are your eyes always on me, human?" lingered in your mind, a constant presence that refused to fade. You had tried to focus on your work, adjusting the systems in the base, checking the equipment, maintaining the power grid. But every time you stepped outside or passed through the corridors of the camp, your eyes would instinctively search for her. There was a pull, something magnetic about her that you couldn't explain. It was more than just her beauty. It was something deeper, something that resonated within you on a level you hadn't known existed. At first, you tried to convince yourself that it was just a fascination, a curiosity born out of the novelty of meeting an alien. After all, you were on a mission to explore the unknown, to make history by being among the first humans to encounter an intelligent species. But the more you thought about it, the more you realized that it wasn't just curiosity. There was something about Juno, something about the way she moved, the way she spoke, that kept you coming back to her thoughts. That evening, you found yourself at the base's central hub, pacing around the control station. The others had retired for the night, and the soft hum of machinery was the only sound in the otherwise silent building. You had hoped that the quiet would help you think, but instead, it only seemed to make everything worse. The solitude gave your mind space to wander, and every time it did, it returned to her. Juno's presence was like a shadow that followed you wherever you went. You couldn't escape her, her voice, her words, her eyes. They were all inescapable, woven into the fabric of your thoughts. You found yourself questioning everything you knew. Why did she look at you like that? Why did she make you feel things you didn't understand? The next morning, you were back at the communications station, trying to focus on the data from the previous night's scans. The crew was busy with their routines, but you barely noticed them. Your thoughts were still tangled in the encounter with Juno. It was as if she had left something behind in you, a thread that connected you to her in ways you couldn't comprehend. You weren't the only one who noticed the change in your behavior. A few of the crew members had been acting strangely around you, casting glances when they thought you weren't looking. You couldn't blame them. They were probably wondering what had happened between you and the alien woman. You couldn't help but feel the weight of their questions, even though no one spoke about it directly. Then, as if on cue, Juno appeared once more. This time, she entered the control station quietly, as though she had always been there, blending with the shadows. The moment you saw her, your heart skipped a beat. She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she just stood there, watching you. Her violet eyes locked onto yours, and you could feel the familiar sensation of being pulled in by her gaze. It was like gravity, drawing you in despite your best efforts to resist. For a moment, you didn't know what to say. Her presence seemed to fill the room, making everything else fade into the background. The sounds of the machinery, the chatter of the crew, it all disappeared when she was near. It was just you and her, and the unspoken question hanging in the air. "You've been avoiding me," she said finally, her voice calm, almost soothing. You shook your head, trying to gather your thoughts. "I haven't been avoiding you," you replied, but even as you said the words, you knew they weren't true. You had been avoiding her, or at least trying to. Her influence on you was too strong, too overpowering to ignore. Her gaze softened just slightly. "You don't need to avoid me, human. I am not here to harm you." But her words only made you more confused. If she wasn't here to harm you, then why did everything about her feel so dangerous? It wasn't physical danger, not in the way one might expect from an alien. No, it was something else entirely, a deeper, more insidious feeling that crept into your soul and refused to let go. Juno stepped closer, her presence more intense than ever. "I've been watching you," she continued, her voice low and steady. "You're not like the others." You felt your pulse quicken at her words. "What do you mean?" you asked, unable to stop the question from escaping your lips. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she tilted her head as if considering her next words carefully. "You're different," she said at last. "Most humans are distracted by their own desires, their own emotions. But you are aware of something more, something that most of your kind cannot see." You frowned, not fully understanding what she was saying. "I don't know what you mean." Juno's expression softened, and for a moment she almost looked kind. "You will," she said simply. "You will understand in time." Before you could respond, she turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the base. You stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, your mind spinning with questions that had no answers. What did she mean? What was she trying to tell you? And why did it feel like your entire world had shifted since she arrived? The rest of the day passed in a blur. You tried to work, tried to focus on the mission, but it was impossible. Every time you closed your eyes, Juno's face appeared in your mind. Her eyes, her words, they haunted you, pulling you into a world you didn't understand. That night, you found yourself unable to sleep. You lay in your bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. Why had Juno singled you out? Why was she so fixated on you? You weren't the captain. You weren't the scientist. You were just the engineer, the one who kept the lights on and the machines running. So why had she chosen you? The question burned in your mind, and the more you thought about it, the more it seemed like the answer was just out of reach, teasing you with its mystery. You wanted to understand, wanted to know what Juno saw in you, but every time you thought you were close to figuring it out, the answer slipped away, like sand through your fingers. You tried to ignore the growing unease in your chest, but it was impossible. Something was happening, something beyond your control. You could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm was gathering on the horizon. And at the center of it all was Juno. The next morning, you decided to confront her. You didn't know what you were going to say, but you couldn't keep pretending like everything was normal. You had to know the truth. You had to understand why she had asked you that question, why she had looked at you with such intensity. You found her in the main hallway of the base, her back to you as she stared out at the bleak landscape beyond the walls. For a moment, you hesitated. What if she didn't want to answer? What if she turned away like she had done before? But you couldn't back down now. You had to know. Juno, you said, your voice steady but filled with uncertainty. She turned to face you, her violet eyes locking onto yours once more. You've come to ask your questions, she said, her voice almost knowing. Yes, you replied, feeling a sense of urgency build in your chest. Why are you here? What do you want from us? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, and you felt that familiar pull once more, as though the world was narrowing down to just the two of you. I am here to observe, she said at last. To guide, but you human. You are different, you are not like the others. You see things that others do not. Her words sent a chill through you, and for the first time, you realized that you were standing at the edge of something much bigger than yourself. The answers you were looking for were closer than you thought, but they were also more dangerous than you could imagine. You will understand, she whispered, her gaze intense. But the question is, are you ready to see what lies beyond? The days that followed Juno's words lingered like an unanswered question, growing heavier with each passing moment. The base, once a place of routine and quiet efficiency, now seemed charged with an unsettling energy. The crew moved around in a sort of haze, their routines still intact, but their eyes, their expressions, told a different story. They were all aware of the alien presence on the base, but none of them had experienced it the way you had. You were no longer just the engineer, the one who fixed things and kept the systems running. Now you were caught in the pull of something far more complex, something beyond the simple task of exploration. Juno had warned you that you would understand in time, but the more you tried to make sense of her words, the more confused you became. She had said you were different, that you saw things others couldn't, but what did that mean? What was it that she had seen in you? Why had she chosen to engage with you instead of the others? Every time you tried to focus on your work, your mind wandered back to her. It wasn't just her presence that occupied your thoughts, but the weight of her gaze, the depth of her eyes that seemed to peer right into your soul. You had tried to push these thoughts aside, to concentrate on the mission at hand, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore the growing tension inside you. You spent hours in the base's central control room, monitoring the systems and scanning the data, but your mind kept drifting. You kept replaying her words over and over in your head. You see things that others do not. The more you thought about it, the more you realized that you didn't really understand what she had meant. There was something inside you that had been awakened, something that you couldn't quite explain. It was like your perception of the world had shifted, and now you were seeing everything through a new lens, one that was colored by her influence. At night, sleep eluded you. Every time you closed your eyes, Juno's face appeared in your dreams. It wasn't just her appearance that haunted you, but the feeling she left behind, the unsettling sense that there was more to her than met the eye. You could feel it deep down, that there was something she wasn't telling you, something hidden just beneath the surface. One night, after another restless evening spent staring at the ceiling, you decided you couldn't ignore it anymore. You had to speak to her. You had to know the truth. You found her outside the base, standing at the edge of the camp, looking out over the barren landscape. The wind was cold, and the sky above was a dull gray, the clouds heavy with the promise of a storm. Juno stood perfectly still, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of the camp's lights, yet somehow she seemed to blend into the shadows. She was both part of the environment and yet entirely separate from it. When she turned and saw you approaching, Her eyes met yours, and for a moment, everything else faded. The world around you became distant, like you were both the only ones in existence. The pull of her gaze was as strong as ever, but this time you fought it. You couldn't allow yourself to get lost in it. You had to understand. Juno, you said, your voice barely above a whisper. I need to know more about what you said about me. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she studied you with an intensity that made you feel exposed, as if she could see right through you. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice soft but powerful. You want answers, she said, her tone almost like a gentle reprimand. But answers are not always what they seem. The truth is not always what you expect. You took a step closer, trying to control the rising panic inside you. I need to understand. Why are you here? What is it that you want from us? Juno's expression softened, and for a moment you saw a glimpse of something almost human in her eyes. She stepped forward, closing the distance between you, and her presence seemed to fill the air, making it hard to breathe. I am here to observe, she said, her voice low and steady. But I am also here to guide. You and your kind have been moving in a direction that I do not fully understand. There is potential within you, human, but you are blinded by your own limitations. You can only see what is in front of you, but there is so much more beyond. You felt a chill run down your spine as her words sank in. What do you mean? What do you see that we do? She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was knowing, as if she had seen the answer long before you had even thought to ask. I see the future, human. I see the potential for something greater, something beyond your understanding. But you are not ready for that yet. You cannot be shown everything all at once. You must learn in time. You felt a mixture of frustration and fear growing inside you. I don't understand, you said, your voice shaking slightly. If we're not ready, why show us at all? Why come here? Juno's eyes softened for just a moment before she spoke again. Because you are ready in a way. You are not like the others. You have the capacity to understand, to see beyond the limits that bind your species. But it will take time. You are the one who will see it first. Her words left you reeling, but there was something about them, something about the way she spoke, that made you believe her. She wasn't just speaking in riddles. She was offering you something, a glimpse into a future that was both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. You speak of a future, you said, your voice steady despite the storm brewing in your chest. But what does that future mean for us? What happens to humanity? What happens to me? Juno's gaze intensified, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. That is for you to discover, she said, her voice almost a whisper now. You will see what is to come, but be warned, human, once you open your eyes there is no going back. With that, she turned and walked away, her movements smooth and graceful, like a shadow slipping into the night. You stood there, frozen in place, as the weight of her words settled in your chest. You felt as if you had just stepped into a world where nothing was certain anymore, where everything you thought you knew about your place in the universe had been turned upside down. As the days passed, the tension only grew. You couldn't escape the feeling that something was coming, something that would change everything. You could feel it in the air, in the way the crew had started to avoid you. It wasn't just your behavior that had changed, it was the base itself. The once quiet and efficient facility now seemed to hum with an energy you couldn't explain. Even the data on the screens felt different, as if it were trying to tell you something hidden in the patterns you couldn't quite decipher. And through it all, Juno's presence remained. She was always there, watching, guiding, but never fully explaining. Each encounter left you with more questions, more uncertainty. The answers were elusive, and yet you couldn't stop seeking them. In the dead of night, when the base was silent and everyone else was asleep, you would sit in front of the screens, studying the data, trying to make sense of it all. You couldn't shake the feeling that you were on the verge of something big, something monumental. But no matter how hard you tried, the pieces never seemed to fit together. One evening, as you sat in the control room, lost in thought, the door behind you opened. You didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Her presence was unmistakable, and the familiar pull of her gaze was as strong as ever. "You've been searching for answers," Juno said, her voice soft but firm. "But some things cannot be found through searching. They must be experienced." You looked up at her, the words from earlier echoing in your mind. "What do you mean?" you asked, your voice hoarse. Juno stepped closer, and for the first time you felt a true connection with her, something beyond words, beyond mere curiosity. It was as if you were standing at the edge of an abyss, about to take the first step into the unknown. "You will see," she said, her eyes locking onto yours. "In time, you will understand." And then, as if she had never been there at all, she was gone. You were left alone in the room, the hum of the machinery surrounding you, but the silence was deafening. You didn't know what was coming, but you knew one thing for sure. You were no longer in control of your own path. Juno had given you a glimpse of something, something vast and incomprehensible. But now you had to decide if you were ready to follow her lead, or if you would resist, holding on to the world you knew, no matter the cost. The days after Juno's cryptic words weighed heavily on you. The air in the base seemed to thrum with an energy that wasn't there before. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. It wasn't just the mission anymore. It was something else, something deeper, something that tugged at the core of your being. You had felt it from the moment Juno set foot on this planet, and now every moment felt like it was leading you to a point of no return. You had stopped sleeping well. The dreams came every night, visions of distant stars, of galaxies spinning, of vast, dark spaces that seemed endless and yet intimate, as though the universe itself was whispering to you. Juno's face always appeared at the center of these dreams, her violet eyes locked onto yours, filled with both mystery and certainty. You couldn't escape her, not even in your sleep. But it wasn't just the dreams. It was everything. The way your mind constantly returned to her, the way her words echoed in your thoughts. You could feel the pull in your chest, stronger than before, and no matter how much you tried to push it away, it always returned, a steady undercurrent that refused to be ignored. You had come to realize that you couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. The crew had noticed your growing obsession with Juno. They spoke in hushed tones when they thought you weren't listening, their voices full of concern, even fear. You knew they were worried about you, but they didn't understand. How could they? They hadn't felt what you felt. They hadn't seen what you had seen. You were no longer just part of the crew. You were someone else, caught between the familiar and the unknown, between your humanity and something far more ancient and alien. It was during one of these restless nights that you finally decided to confront Juno again. You couldn't keep living in this limbo. You had to know the truth, no matter the cost. You needed to understand why she had chosen you, why she had singled you out among the others. You had to know what she wanted from you. You found her once again outside the base, standing in the same spot where she had appeared to you before. The wind was cold and the sky was overcast, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. She stood still as though waiting for you, her presence undeniable even in the silence of the night. This time, you didn't hesitate. You walked toward her, your footsteps slow but steady. You had made up your mind. You weren't going to shy away anymore. You weren't going to run. You were going to face this, whatever it was, and figure it out. As you drew closer, Juno turned toward you, her eyes meeting yours with that same intense gaze that made everything else fade into the background. It was like the whole universe became insignificant when she looked at you. For a moment, you almost forgot what you had come to ask her, but then you remembered. You had to know. "Juno," you said, your voice steady though your heart raced, "I can't keep going like this. I need to understand. I need to know what you want from me." She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she studied you, her eyes tracing the lines of your face as though reading something you couldn't see. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something almost gentle about it. It wasn't pity, it wasn't judgment, it was something else. Something that made your chest tighten as though she could see deep into your soul. "You have been asking yourself questions for some time," she said at last, her voice low yet powerful. "But you have not asked the most important question." You frowned. "What do you mean?" "You ask what I want from you," Juno continued, stepping closer. "But you have not yet asked what you want from me." The question hit you harder than you expected. What did you want from her? You had spent so much time thinking about what she wanted, what she saw in you, but you had never once stopped to consider your own desires. You had been consumed by her, by the pull of her gaze, by the mystery of who she was and what she represented. But now, as she stood before you, so close that you could feel the warmth of her presence, you realized that you hadn't asked yourself the question that mattered. "I don't know," you said quietly, your voice barely above a whisper. Juno smiled slightly, the expression almost imperceptible, but you could see it in the way her lips curved, in the way her eyes softened. "That is the first step," she said, "to admit that you do not know." You stood there, unsure of what to say next. The silence stretched between you, thick with unspoken thoughts. Juno's presence filled the space around you, like a force that was both calming and electrifying at the same time. She was waiting for something, but you didn't know what it was. "You don't have to have all the answers," she said, her voice like a soft melody. "You just have to be willing to search for them." You thought about her words, trying to make sense of them. Was she asking you to abandon everything you knew? To leave behind your humanity, your old life, and embrace something new, something foreign? Could you even do that? Could you step into the unknown, follow her lead, and trust that it would lead you to a better place? Or was this all just a game, a test that you would fail like so many others before you? "I don't know if I can do this," you admitted, your voice faltering. "I don't know if I can follow you." Juno's gaze softened and she reached out, placing her hand on your shoulder. Her touch was light, but it carried a weight that made you feel as though the world was shifting beneath you. "You are not alone," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "You will never be alone." The words were simple, but they struck you deeply. You had been carrying the weight of this journey on your own, unsure of what was expected of you, afraid of what you might lose. But in that moment, as Juno's hand rested on your shoulder, you realized that perhaps you didn't have to carry it all alone. Perhaps there was a path forward, one that didn't require you to have all the answers, one that didn't require you to know everything before you could take the first step. "You have a choice," Juno continued, her eyes never leaving yours. "You can stay here with your people and continue to live in the way you have always lived. Or you can choose to step beyond the limits of your understanding, to see what lies beyond." The words hung in the air, and you knew, deep down, that this was the moment of truth. You couldn't go back. Once you made your decision, there would be no turning back. The life you had known, the world you had lived in, would be left behind. "What happens if I choose to go with you?" you asked, your voice steady now, as if the question itself had given you strength. Juno's smile deepened, and for the first time you saw something more than the distant, enigmatic figure you had known. You saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a hope that had been buried beneath the layers of mystery and ancient knowledge. "If you choose to go with me," she said, "you will see things that no human has ever seen. You will experience the universe as few ever will. But it will not be easy. There will be challenges and there will be pain, but you will be free." "Free," you echoed, unsure of what she meant. "Free to become who you were always meant to be," she replied softly. "Free to see beyond the limitations of your kind. Free to understand your place in the vastness of the cosmos." The silence that followed her words was heavy, as if the entire universe were waiting for your decision. You knew this moment was the turning point, the moment where everything could change. And as you looked into Juno's eyes, you realized that the choice wasn't just about following her. It was about something deeper. It was about embracing the unknown, about pushing past your own fears and limitations, and about discovering what lay beyond. "I'm ready," you said at last, your voice firm, filled with a sense of resolve that had not been there before. Juno's smile widened and she nodded. "Then come with me," she said. And with that you stepped into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever came next.